Good morning. Hi, it's great to see you. If you've never met, I'm Jay, part of the team here. Really glad you're here. I know we've got our whole South Hills crew joining us today. So glad you're here. Wish I was there with you. And here we are. In 2018, I was in a dark place. It was just like very chaotic on a number of levels, personal life and ministry and on and on. And I came across a book called Subversive Sabbath, written by Dr. A.J. Swoboda. And the book was a significant gift to me in that season. And after that, I just started consuming as much A.J. Swoboda stuff as I could. And I kind of became like a disciple of his from a digital distance. You know, it was like a weird thing. And then over the last couple of years have had the opportunity to build a relationship with AJ, and he's become a friend. And we have the great honor and joy of learning from him today. For those of you who are unfamiliar, AJ he's a pastor. He was a church planter in Portland, Oregon. Planted a beautiful church up there called Theophilus, which continues to this day. Now he spends most of his time as an academic. He's a Bible and theology professor. He leads a doctorate program in spiritual formation and soul care. He's written like a dozen books. I mean, just on and on and on. But beyond that, the reason we asked AJ to spend some time with our team and the formation conference this weekend and then teaching our entire church family today is AJ is an oddity. He's a rare bird, and you'll experience this in the next 30, 40 minutes. He is a high level theologian, and he's going to help all of us in the next few moments dive into the theological depths. But at the same time, maybe even more than that, he's a pastor, like a real pastor, who is going to offer us empathy and care and love and hope in the midst of so much that many of us are going through. So I can't wait for you all to learn from him. So would you please give a warm Westgate welcome to my friend, AJ Swoboda.
Thanks, brother. Thank you. Oh, what kind words. Brother, if I'm discipling you and you're discipling me back, then it's like the blind leading the blind. We're in trouble, man. We're in trouble. I have been equally shaped and formed by your pastor's work. It's good morning. It's so good to be with you. Oh, my goodness gracious. I woke up this morning at my hotel. I live in Oregon with my wife and my son, and I walked out my hotel, and I think I made a really big life decision this morning. I think I'm moving to San Jose. There are basically 5 factors that have gone into my decision making. Number 1, you have a son here, which I'm not gonna lie makes a big difference for people like me. Number 2, I had a Korean barbecue that I'm tearing up. I can't even describe. I had Ocean City kitchen. And then I had Blue Bottle coffee, and then it was the straw that broke the camel's whole life. Is they gave me just one singular donut from Stan's. Now that was it. I'm done. So I haven't even talked to my wife or my son. So I've got a hard conversation later. You can be praying for me as I have these difficult conversations. Oh. It's so good to be with you. If you have a Bible, I would really value you getting there to Genesis chapter 4. I want to utilize our time well and wisely today, and so I'm going to jump right in to what we're going to talk about this morning. I had such a great time at the Formation Conference. You need to come to the next one. They host such good stuff, so great. But today, this morning, I've actually been invited to talk about something that I'm a little bit of a specialist in, and when I say that, what I mean is, over the course of the last 10 years of my life, I have been researching, writing, and reflecting on something that I feel many Christians don't think a whole lot about, and I don't like that, and I want to fix that. And so this morning, I want to talk to you about the topic of desires. I recently published a book about 6 months ago called The Gift of Thorns, which I don't think we have any more available here. In fact, because I'm an academic, I want to make some resources available to you for those of you that want to do a deep dive after our conversation today, because I'm going to guess that what we're going to talk about today is going to raise some questions for you. For the last couple months, I've actually been writing a series of reflections on desire on a Substack that I do called The Low-Level Theologian. And you are more than welcome to go read that. It is completely free to you. It is a gift as a resource. You are not required. I'm not selling anything to you, but there are some resources here that I would encourage you, if you want, after we're done, to go take a look at on my publication list, so that you can get a sense of, man, how do we think about this topic called desire? So I'm going to kind of do a weird order here, because I would normally, when I preach, I would normally immediately get into the text and then start talking about that. But I'm going to reverse the order a little bit today. I want to actually start with a really important introduction. I want to tell you a story. This last Christmas, I was, Christmas morning, I was with my 12-year-old son at the time, he's 13 now, my wife Quinn, and my mom and stepdad, and we were Christmas morning. I was, got up early morning, and I did what a good Christian dad should do. I said, you know what, this morning, we are going to read the story of the birth of Jesus. I am nominated for Father of the Year. These are the sort of reasons why. I said, let's read this story. And so we sat in our my parents' living, my mom and stepdad's living room, and we read the story of the birth of Jesus. And as we were sharing, as I was reading and we were reflecting on what Christmas meant for our family, I noticed that my mom and my stepdad were getting emotional. They were getting really vulnerable about some things. God's story in our family is I met Jesus when I was 16 in high school. My mom, I took her to church. She met Jesus. And then I baptized my mom when I was 18 years old. And at that story, God began to just do a remarkable miracle in my family. And we were just talking about what God had done in our family. And they were getting really vulnerable. So my 12-year-old son is sitting right over here, and he leans in, as a 12-year-old is to do. He leans in and he just gets right in my ear. And he just says this. He goes, Dad, can I play video games? And I said kind of stern, I was like, no, we're being vulnerable right now. We're being vulnerable, so be vulnerable. He's like, okay. And for the next he sat there, and then for the next 40 minutes, it was beautiful. We were just pouring out our emotions and our feelings and our stories and what God has done with us. My stepdad was crying. He never cries. And after about 40 minutes, there was this lull in the conversation, about 30 seconds. And the 12-year-old just leans right into the ear. And he just says this. He says, Dad, the vulnerability is over. And I said, just go play video games. Please, now. I want to tell you why I love kids. I love kids, and if you spend any time with them, they actually know what they want. There are parents that are like, yes. And not only do they know what they want, they say it. I want food now. I want video games. I want a donut. I think one of the gifts of children is that children do not hold back their inner lives from us. I think this is one of the gifts of childlikeness, is that your inner life and your outer life are the same. But I would also say, here's one of the things that happens as we get older. I'm 43, and as I move into my midlife, right? I've noticed in myself that the older I get, the better I become at being different on the inside than I am from the outside. And that I actually have the capacity, maybe if you're an adult, you've experienced this too, like I have the ability, we call it faking it. I have the ability to have desires, but I never say those desires. And often I'm actually not in touch with those desires. I don't actually know the things that are motivating me. Why did I say yes to that engagement? Why did I go to that place? Why did I look at that on the internet? Why did that there's a sense of that our inner life, we're not in touch with why we want what we want. This is a weird thing that's happened to me the older I've gotten, is that I really despise, it's very weird. It's not funny. It's like I despise my birthday. And it has taken like literally counseling to figure out that I hate my birthday because I never know what to say to the question, what do you want? I don't know what to say because I don't know what I want. This thing happens as we grow older, where we lose touch with the things inside of us that motivate us and draw us and make us do what we do. And if we do know what those things are, often we stuff them. We don't invite anybody to talk about it. We certainly don't invite God into those desires, for heaven's sake, because we wouldn't want him messing with the stuff that we want. You know, in some sense, I find this to be the case in a lot of churches. And I'm not making this an indictment about you. Please, don't think that it may be about you. I just don't know. But in some churches, I have found that the conversation about desire is that desires are just bad. And if you have desires, then you should get rid of them. That we should be these robots that walk around desirelessly, when in reality, the story of the Bible tells us that God made us as desiring creatures. Desire is good and glorious, but many of our churches just say, stuff it, don't listen to it. All desire is bad. So some churches are like, just don't have desire. But then I look at our culture, and it does the absolute opposite. It says, chase every desire. Whatever you want, do it. If Freud were in the room, he would say, if you don't, you're repressing it. Our culture has language for this. They would say something like this: you do you. Which basically is our culture's way of saying, you are bound to do your desire. You have to. You are your desire. Your identity is your desire. So our culture would say, you do you. I got a big problem with that. Here's the problem with you do you, is I gotta be candid. Monday morning for AJ Swoboda is very different than Friday evening for AJ Swoboda. And the things that I want on Monday morning are very different than the things I want on Friday night. So if you're gonna say, AJ, you do you, here's my question back. Well, what you am I supposed to do? Because you changes a lot. I've had to reflect on this. There are some desires that if I follow and pursue will lead to life and goodness and God's kingdom coming. But there are some desires that if I followed, I would devastate my family. My son would pay a very heavy price. The church would hurt. Friends, what you and I need at this moment in time is we need a rubric. We need to know, like, okay, what desires are good and what desires do I need to crucify? I was, just for fun, I'm an academic, and I have these things, these demonic activities called faculty meetings. That just, to me, there's a couple academics in the room just had inner healing at that moment right there. I just said that. And one of the faculty meetings, I just for fun, I decided for the 1 hour of the faculty meeting that for 1 hour, I would write down every desire that came to my heart in 1 hour. Because I needed something to do. So I just said 1 hour. And so I had this pen and paper. I sat by myself that day. And I just wrote stuff out. And I want to read to you my list. This is 1 hour. And I'll be very clear with you. There are many things I omitted. In 1 hour, a more fulfilling prayer life, Jesus, more coffee, shorter faculty meetings, pizza, sex, updated numbers on a publication, to go home for dinner, more time with my son, better sales numbers on a publication, this faculty meeting to end, Jesus to return, a hug, time alone, a more fulfilling sense of calling, more friendship, and a pen with more ink. In 1 hour. There's a reason. In the 4th century, there was a guy named St. Augustine who famously said, "Our lives are a gymnasium of desire." You are a complex person with some desires that are so good and godly, and some that I want to invite you today need to be placed on the cross. And what you and I need is help to learn how to do this. It's interesting, before I read the text in Genesis 4, Jesus is recorded in the Gospels. He's recorded of asking 308 different questions, meaning he's just always asking questions. Do you know what the most repeated question Jesus ever asked is? He asks it more than any other question. The question, what do you want? And let's be really honest with ourselves. He's not asking because he doesn't know. He is not looking for information. He's looking for intimacy. And today, I think God wants to ask us, what do you want? What do you want? Genesis 4. The text we're going to read is the very first story that happens after the Garden of Eden. We had these 3 chapters, chapter 1 and 2, where God created these humans. He placed them in a place called Eden, or delight. In Genesis 3, there's this serpent that comes into the divine Eden space and tempts the woman and the man and deceives them into listening to God, listening to him over God. And immediately after their deception, they are banished from the Garden of Eden. That word banished is actually the word Genesis 3 uses. And it's using a word that is a complex word that actually is this. It's the same Hebrew word that means divorce in the Old Testament. So it's saying, what it's saying in Genesis 3 is when they leave the Garden of Eden, it's not just that they're no longer in the garden, it's that there has now been a relational breakdown. They are now divorced from the presence of God. They are no longer in the sustaining presence of God that they had once been in. G.K. Chesterton, that famous Christian apologist, once famously said, "The world after Eden is a great divorce court." Everything is one big divorce. And his idea here is that we are all fractured, broken, unreconciled, both with God and with each other. And in Genesis 4, we have the very first story of what happens after the garden. It goes like this. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. And she said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to a brother, Abel. And I just want you to notice that Cain is the older brother and Abel is the younger brother. That's very important for this story. Now, Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And the Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering, he did not look on favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. Verse 6, then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is," notice this, "crouching at the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." And all the commentators on Genesis will point out that, notice, the image of sin crouching is the same image we had the chapter before of the serpent who crouches in the garden. So sin here is being cast as the new serpent. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" And he says, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And of course the answer to that is yes. You are your brother's keeper. The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out." In the text here, that word cries out is an onomatopoeia. It's a word that sounds like what it is. And it's the Hebrew word tza'ak, tza'ak. And it's intended to sound like somebody who's being choked out. Tza'ak. tzak. Your brother's blood, tzak, it cries out from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, from which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from the hand. And when you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crop for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord said to him, not so. Anyone who kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain, so that no one who found him would kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. I want you to see 4 things this morning. I want you to see, first of all, God's desire. I want you to see human desire, evil desire, and then I want you to see the healing of desire. First, divine desire. We have this part of this story that's very important is that these are brothers. Cain, of course, is the older brother, and Abel is the younger brother. The word Abel, just giving you some language here to kind of illustrate how this is powerful. Abel, if you go to the book of Ecclesiastes and you read that all of life is meaningless or vapor, have you ever read that? All of life is vapor. The word that's used in Ecclesiastes, all of life is vapor, is the word havel, which is the same word as Abel. His name is vapor. Because as you know, living in San Francisco, at one moment the cloud descends, and the next it's gone. And Cain is the older brother. So in ancient antiquity, the big idea is that the older brother is always, in almost any honor shame culture in the ancient world, the older brother is always the righteous one. They're always they always get the inheritance. They're always the blessed one. They're always the one that carries on the family name. The older brother in sibling sets is always the most important one. And you'll notice in this story, who is the righteous one? The older one or the younger one? The younger one. Now if you were reading this in antiquity, you'd be like, that doesn't make any sense. The older one is always the blessed one, and yet the younger one is the righteous one. Now, you got to ask yourself the question, why didn't God receive Cain's sacrifice? And there are literally whole communities of Bible scholars getting in fistfights behind Walmarts over this question. I mean, this is a hot topic. Why in the world would God receive Abel's sacrifice, but not Cain's? And there's actually a couple clues here. One hint or one possibility is I want you to notice that the gift that Cain brings is the gift of fruits and vegetables from the land. He brings fruits and veggies. But Abel brings a blood sacrifice of his animals. And when you play out the rest of the Old Testament storyline, you're going to find that both are actually acceptable sacrifices. There are times in the Bible in which God says to give fruit and veggies. It just so turns out that in the Old Testament, fruits and vegetables always represented offerings of thankfulness, whereas blood sacrifices are always offerings of atonement to make things right. I think what may be going on, this is one option, is that Cain, rather than making things right with God, is giving him a thank you note. Have you ever at Christmas had somebody you haven't spoken to for 10 years because you really can't stand them and they write you a Christmas card? And you're like, you're writing this to me? We have some major business to work through. There's a possibility what Cain is doing here is what is needed is not thankfulness. God is not, there's a deeper fracture, divorce that needs more than thankfulness. Something must die so this relationship can be right. That's one option. Another option is you're going to notice some of the key language here. It says that Abel brings the fat from the best animal in his flock, whereas Cain brings, the word says, it brings some of his vegetables and fruit. And notice the difference between fat and some. Fat and some. You go, why does fat matter? Here's why it matters. In the ancient world, the most important part of an animal was the fat. You could make oil out of it. You could eat it. It had protein. It was really good for family. It was very important. It was the most important part of an animal. He is bringing the best of his flock. And I want you to notice that Cain doesn't bring the best. He brings some. I think what's going on here is I think Abel is bringing his best as an offering. And Cain is bringing some leftovers. Now, those are two ways to read this. The truth is, the book of Hebrews answers the question. Because the book of Hebrews says that when Abel sacrificed to the Lord, and he gave his sacrifice, he's considered righteous for one reason, because he gave his sacrifice in faith. It was not because he was not the older brother because he was righteous. It wasn't being the favorite. It was that he has received for one reason. He has offered his sacrifice to God in faith. One of the things I try to drill into my students' minds in my courses at the university is I've got a lot of students who lean on their grandparents' faith as a way of basically a hall pass that they don't need to have it. And you know what I tell them? I say this. It sounds super nerdy, but it's so true. God does not have grandchildren. He has children. He wants you. He doesn't want to know you through your grandparents. He wants to know you. And so the idea here is that faith, isn't it beautiful that God does not operate with us out of favoritism or who is first or who is older. God operates with people through faith. That's glorious. It's powerful. But it doesn't get away. You got to see that there is a sacrifice that God does not want. He rejects it. He rejects it. Which is absolutely critical for us because, friends, we worship a God of desire. Our God wants stuff. When my wife and I had our foster daughter for 9 months before she went back into her home that went through a healing process. When we had our foster daughter for 9 months, I will tell you, for a foster daughter, the most important theological concept she got by living with a theologian is, young woman, God wants you. Do you know how powerful it is to be wanted? You are wanted. And not just part of you. He doesn't want your leftovers. He wants all of you. He's a God of desire. I like to put it this way. God did not make the Garden of Eden because he needed more vegetables. He wanted you. There's 613, did you know this? 613 different commandments in the Old Testament. Some of them are repeats, but there was a guy in the 12th century who counted up all the commandments. 613, that's a lot of commandments. I've got like 2 in my family, and we do both of them really poorly. I don't know about your family, but 600, and you hear that, you go, that's like a lot of, that's a lot of stuff to do. You got to remember, in the ancient world, guess what? The gods of Canaan, the gods of Egypt, the gods of Phoenicia, the gods of Assyria, the gods of Babylon, you know what? Their gods, they almost never told people what they wanted. Why? Because they wanted to hold you at bay. They wanted to keep you afraid as a power play. Because if they don't tell you what they want, they've got you under their fingers. But the God of the Bible, he actually tells you what he wants. And I got to ask you, would you rather serve a God who never told you what he wanted or a God who was really clear with you? How many of you have had this experience of having a friend or a family member who wants things from you, but they never tell you? And that is why you're in therapy. Because it is hell on earth to be held account to someone's desires and they never tell you. Friends, you have a God who loves you so much, he's honest with you. And he tells you what he wants. That's a gift. Go read the 10 Commandments. I mean, this has always cracked me up. Because when God describes himself in the 10 Commandments, he says, first commandment, Don't worship any other gods. Commandment 2, don't make an image of anything. And God gives a reason why. He's like, why shouldn't we make any idols or things? And he goes, because I'm a jealous God. And you go, jealous? You're jealous? Isn't that like a sin? It's always funny that Jesus describes himself as a thief in the night. Isn't that a felony? I'm jealous. God is a jealous God. You go, why? That's so unfair, because the 10th commandment says, you shall not be jealous of your neighbors. And you go like, okay, I guess you get to be jealous, but we'll just be all content down here. Why does God get to be jealous, but we don't? And by the way, he's jealous for everything. Why? Because you and I always get jealous for stuff that is not ours. God gets jealous for stuff that is already his. And guess what is God's? Everything. God is a desiring God. He wants you. Second, not only do we see God as a desiring God who has a rubric of the kinds of offerings he receives, but we also see that there is human desire involved in this story. One of the interesting things about the story of Cain and Abel just after the Garden of Eden is that nowhere in the Garden of Eden did God ever tell Cain or Abel that they were to sacrifice anything to God. There's no commandment in Genesis 3 where God says, okay, I'm sending you out into the cold now, and you're going to need to make daily sacrifices to me. God never says this. And the fact that they immediately, almost knee-jerk reaction, begin to offer sacrifices to God, I think speaks to humanity. C.S. Lewis, in one of his books, wrote about what he called the Tao, and it's this idea that every human culture shares some shared moral visions. In every human culture, murder is an evil. It's a wrong. Cannibalism is, generally speaking, an evil in most cultures. Things like, there's a variety of things that are across the board. And C.S. Lewis says we have this unique capacity to need to worship something. And the fact that they worship immediately after the Garden of Eden speaks to the fact that humans, in their very nature, are worshipers. Humans cannot not worship. Bob Dylan was right. You gotta serve somebody. And if you don't worship God, it's not that you stop worshiping, it's that you worship something else. You start worshiping yourself. You start worshiping your job. You start worshiping your 401k. Your Roth IRA. You start worshiping X, Y, and Z. Humans cannot not worship. They immediately begin to worship God because we are made to, you can't not, you have to worship something. And immediately, right, they begin to worship, and it becomes very clear that when Cain discovers that his sacrifice was not received, he gets sad. He wants his sacrifice to be accepted. He desires it. And he says, why can't what do I need to do? He wants, and there's a part of the story of the Cain and Abel account that nobody ever pays attention to. I actually feel tremendous compassion for Cain. Nobody ever takes Cain's side. And I gotta say, I love that Cain wanted to do what God wanted. Now he doesn't, he ends up killing his brother, but he wanted to do what was right. See, the reality for all of us, I mean, this is one of the coolest parts of being a Christian, is that you and I worship a God. When we were created in the Garden of Eden, when humanity was made, we were made by a desiring God who created us to desire good things. Did you know the very first two commandments in Genesis 2, when God creates the humans, the first two commandments, he first says, be fruitful and multiply. And then he says to them, eat from the tree, all the trees you want, except from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Isn't it? I don't know how anybody could not love this book. The first two commandments are about sex and food. What a great book. What a terrific religious experience we are being given by God. God created us to desire. After lunch, I'm going to go, I know what I'm going to tell David. I'm going to say, you have to take me to Stan's. I gotta tell you, that is a divine gift from God to me. That desire is good. There's people in this room that desire intimacy and friendship. Some of us want to get married, and we have been taught that those are bad things. And I want to say to you, those desires are good and godly. I want to bless those desires. If you want friends, if you need a good nap, if you need a donut, friends, God has given you, some of you want to be artists. Some of you moved here because you're making your way to Apple and you're gonna break in. God brought some of you here to become teachers and police officers, and God gave you dreams of being a doctor and a mom and a great kid. Those desires are good and godly, and the church is not a hospice for good desires. It is a place where God wants our godly desires to be nurtured and cared for. You have been given by God good desires. And those good desires, friends, deserve to be listened to. When the psalmist says that God desires to give you the desires of your heart, that's what it's talking about. But that's, of course, not the whole story. Because there's also evil desire. We see that Cain is a complex fellow because on one hand, he does want to do what's right. Eventually, he commits this murder. Isn't that interesting? The first chapter after the Garden of Eden is they are doing a swan dive into iniquity. I mean, you would think after the Garden of Eden, the humans would take some time to inch their way to evil. Let's just lie for a chapter. Let's just gossip for 2. We'll and they're nah, we're going straight to murder. We're going right in. Isn't it interesting? It's almost like the Bible is saying that the minute humans are no longer in the sustaining presence of God, everything begins to fall apart. You and I cannot live outside of the presence of God. We fall apart. In fact, this is the first murder in the Bible. There's a lot of murders in the Bible. And this is the first one. And I don't think it's a mistake that the first murder in the Bible is religiously motivated. The Bible actually names the possibility of even religion being a thing where evil desires are given power. But immediately, this desire it's broken, it's shattered. Human desire outside the Garden of Eden all of a sudden begins to contort and twist and become, what Paul calls the sarx, which is his word for what you and I call the flesh. The flesh, quite simply, is God's God-given desires to us outside the presence of God. And what happens outside the presence of God is our good and godly desires begin to contort, twist, become self-centered, and they become a grotesque misrepresentation of God's original design. Here's a problem for most of us. In fact, not for most of us, for every single one of us, is that we are all a civil war of desire. You know your own heart. At one minute, you want the good thing. At the next minute, you're like, who is that? I want that. This is what Paul says in the book of Romans. I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I do want to do. You are a person in complete civil war, and inside of you is both the good desire and the flesh. The problem for most of us is that we equate the two, and we end up telling people to crucify their desire. When in reality, the Bible never tells you to crucify your desire. It says to crucify your flesh. Your desire is good. And that civil war inside of you, of the dark and the good living together, fighting with one another like Jacob and Esau in the womb, that civil war of desires, it's hard. See, here's the deal. You're going to live with the flesh until the day you die. When you come to Jesus, your flesh does not disappear. It does not disappear. In fact, you continue to walk with the flesh. What's incredible is because you have the Spirit of God in you. And when you follow Jesus, you get the Spirit. When the Spirit of God descends on you and lives in you and embodies you and baptizes you, you are no longer bound by oppression and slavery to have to listen and follow the flesh. you are now able to say, no, I am a child of God. I'm teaching this semester my favorite class I teach called Bible, Sexuality, and Gender. And every semester I teach it, I think I'm going to get fired. Because in higher ed, these are tricky classes to teach. But I am completely convinced when I teach this class that the Bible is true and it liberates and it frees people. But when I teach this class, there is always a young person who will make their way into my office hours, who will say something like this. They will say, Dr. Swoboda, I've never told anybody this, but I have sexual desires that I wrestle with every day. But I want to say, I am choosing to place those on the cross and not follow them. And I look at that person and I say, the kingdom of God has come on you. Even Jesus Christ was tempted. Let me ask you this. Please answer appropriately. Did Jesus ever sin? You need to say that faster and louder next time. Did Jesus ever sin? No. Was Jesus tempted? Yes. Is temptation a sin? No. Some of you beat yourself up because you face temptation. And you just beat yourself up like you're a failure. Jesus Christ endured temptation. The fact that you face those inner desires doesn't make you bad. You have the power of the Holy Spirit. And you no longer have to follow those desires. Fourthly, and lastly, there's a healing of desire. Genesis 4, listen to this. God says, if you do what's right, sin, if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. The sense you get here is either you will be ruled by desire or desire will rule over you. But that word, it's a beautiful, we're doing a lot of Hebrew this morning, but that word desires, it's one of my favorite Hebrew words. And I apologies to the people in the front row because I usually spit when I say the word. But it's the word teshuka. Teshuka. It's desire. And it was the same word that was used in Genesis 3 when the woman looks at the tree and she sees that it's desirous for the giving of wisdom. And why this is important is for 2 chapters, you just had the word desire used 2 times. Desire was right there before the fall, and desire is right there after the fall. But here's what's weird. Immediately after Genesis 4, the word desire disappears for nearly 1,000 years. The Bible stops using the word for nearly 1,000 years. Why? There's a number of Bible nerds, scholars, one named Ellen Davis who teaches at Duke University. She's absolutely brilliant. And she wrote a book on this. And she says that the Bible stops using the word desire because there's a sense that desire was what led to the fall and desire is what led to the first murder. And that the Bible knows desire is powerful. It is powerful, but it's also dangerous. And that the Bible moves away from desire for the same reason that you and I move away from desire. Have you ever had an experience where you desired something, you got it, and then it really hurt you? You wanted romance, and you finally got it, and afterwards you're like, well, I'm done with romance. You wanted church, and you found a church, and you got deeply hurt, and then you're like, well, I'm done with church. You want to love God, and then you love God, and then you're like, well, that was not what I thought it was going to be, and you just stop wanting God. Ellen Davis thinks what's going on here is that the Bible is putting a red flag up and it's saying, warning, 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 dangerous is dangerous, desire is dangerous. For 1,000 years it disappears until 1 chapter. In the Old Testament book of Song of Songs, it's a metaphor, it's a picture of these 2 people on their first night of their marriage. It's a very graphic novel. Jews actually don't let their kids read the book until they're 13 years old. Which is wise. And there's this line in the book, chapter 7. For 1,000 years, the word teshuka has not been used. And the woman says over the man, I belong to my beloved. and his teshuka is for me. He wants me. Come, my beloved, let us go to the countryside. Let us spend the night in the villages. What seems to be happening is that this long-forgotten idea of desire that has been written off for nearly 1,000 words is being brought back. Why? Because desire is now being healed. When I was a kid, I want to close with this. When I was a kid, I had a weird childhood. When I was a kid, I had to be vulnerable with you, I had some unchosen, very painful, traumatic sexual experiences as a child. And those experiences at a very young age had a very big impact on both my self-understanding, but also on my sexuality as a very young man. And when I was a kid, those experiences, I couldn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't know who to talk to about it. I just sort of held it all in. And those stories from my childhood, pretty much my entire adult life, I have just not paid attention to. I've ignored them. I've stuffed them in the closet. I have not listened to them. I put them in the basement. I didn't want to listen to them. And 2 years ago, I made the most important decision of my adult life. I jokingly tell people I'm doing a swan dive into my midlife crisis. And if you're going to do your midlife, you might want to get some therapy for it. And I hired my therapist, who's a Christian, to go away with me for 4 days, so that for 4 days, I could get into my childhood. And for 4 days, I went away, and for the very first time, I began to open up those stories. And as I walked away from that 4-day period of allowing God into those stories in a way that I had this epiphany. It's the weirdest epiphany. I was leaving these appointments and I had this epiphany. Do you remember when Jesus said, "Let the children come to me"? I've always interpreted that to mean like, let actual physical children come to Jesus, and I think that's probably what he meant. But it dawned on me that as I was walking away from this 4 days, that God was actually inviting my childhood to him. And in that 4-day period, I experienced such profound healing in my story. And I feel like I need to say this because in our culture, it feels like this is lost a lot. But I want to say that Jesus is so good that he can even heal us retroactively. That he can go back into our story and heal our memories and heal our history. And so I want to say, the great physician is great. And he can touch not just our bodies and our minds and our souls, he can touch our desires too. And as a man at 43 years old, I have a God who heals. And so do you. Would you stand with me, please? We're going to sing a song together, and as we do, I would invite you to pray with me, please. Jesus, we hear your words to us. Your great question, what do you want? And wherever that answer may land for us, we bear it as a gift offering to you. We place our desires in your hands. The good, the bad, and the ugly, we place them before you. And we want to boldly ask together as a church to be healed in our desires, to touch our desires. God, would you touch our desires? We're going to sing to you, Jesus. You're worthy of our praise, and we cry out, thy will be done, God. Thy will be done. Would you heal us, God? Let's sing together.